Good afternoon, 6th grade. Welcome to Writing Intervention. Today we're going to be talking about dialogue, and specifically using dialogue to introduce a conflict. This is something that we're going to use in our essays that we're writing tomorrow in English class. So, first thing to remember about dialogue is how to punctuate it. Most of you have gotten pretty good at this from introducing quotes in essays in English, but let's go over it just to be sure. So, dialogue just means quotes from characters or people in a story or article. And, as you should know, dialogue always begins and ends with quotation marks. And dialogue is almost always introduced or ended with a comma. We'll go a little bit more in depth. Where do we put that comma? Well, when the comma comes before the quote, it's always outside the quotation marks. As you can see here, Justice said, comma, don't put me in the trash can. When it comes after the quote, though, the comma is always inside the quotation marks. So that becomes, don't put me in the trash can, comma, quotation mark, Justice said. But if the dialogue ends with a comma, the next word is not capitalized unless it's a name. So, don't put me in the trash can, she said. The S is lowercase. Unfortunately for her, Justice still ended up in the trash can. There are a couple exceptions to this rule. I want to talk about one of them. You never put a comma after a question mark or exclamation point inside quotation marks. So, in this example, what is that? He asked. You notice there is no comma there. The question mark takes that comma's place. And here, get out of here! Exclamation point. She exclaimed. Again, no comma. Now, it's your turn to prove that you learned. Turn to Wednesday, January 7th in your writing intervention packet. Now look at part 1. You see 4 sentences. What you need to do is correct each sentence by adding or taking away commas and or changing capital letters. Then, once you've corrected the sentence, you decide whether it's in the past or present tense. Hopefully you remember that from tomorrow. If not, go back to that video. Do not skip this slide until you've completed part 1. Great. Good job. Now I want to talk about conflict. Conflict is something that we've talked a lot about in English class. We talked about it with Hatchet, and it'll come up again and again. Just a refresher, conflict is the main problem in a story. What I need you to do now is copy down that definition under part 2 where it says conflict. Once you've copied this down, you may move on. Great. So what we're focusing on is using dialogue to introduce the conflict or the problem in the story that we're writing. Dialogue can be a really good way to do this if you use it right. Now there are 2 ways that you can use dialogue to make sure that you're introducing conflict in an interesting way. That's either to introduce a conflict between 2 people, such as an argument, or a conversation between people talking about a situation that they're in that presents a conflict for them. Let's look at that first example first. Conflict between 2 people. One example is people having a problem with each other. So, people are arguing, and this is a perfect time to use dialogue between those 2 people to introduce this conflict. Here's an example. Look at this mom and son screaming at each other. So I see that these 2 are having a problem. They're having an argument. So I'm going to write dialogue for the son and the mom. So I wrote that the son is saying, "Why the heck did you flush my goldfish down the toilet? He was still alive." Brian screams. "It was so ugly it ruined the whole house," answers mom. So there, I just created a conflict between a mother and a son using dialogue in an argument. And you're going to do the same thing using this illustration. This is Calvin and Tamia. They're having an argument. what you're going to do is write one piece of dialogue for each character in the present tense to show that they are having an argument, to introduce a conflict between the two characters. These need to be full sentences, punctuated correctly in the present tense. Do not skip this slide until you've written these two complete sentences. Good job. Here's the second example of a way that we can use dialogue to introduce a conflict. That's dialogue between two or more characters who are starting to realize that they're in some kind of bad situation. You can introduce what this situation is through the dialogue between those people. I know that sounds kind of vague. Here's an example. These two people are lost in a maze. So instead of just saying that John and Maria are lost in a maze, I'm going to use dialogue between the two to illustrate the fact that they're starting to realize they're lost, that there's a conflict. You know how to get out of here, right, Maria? Asked John. Maria answered, no, I actually have no idea. So here, through their dialogue, the reader starts to realize that there's a conflict brewing in these people's lives. You're going to do this same thing with this photo of a shark and two people. This is Sarah and David. They're alone in the ocean, and a shark just appeared. So you're going to write one piece of dialogue for each person in the past tense to introduce this conflict. Just like before, you need to use complete sentences and correct punctuation. Do not skip this slide until both of those boxes are filled. Great job, 6th grade. We'll see you tomorrow in English for writing.